to start. And I'm going to try to make a mental note of the number of answers here, because this is something that we will come back to later in the presentation or in the session.
So ideally, there should be 17 people logged into, or at least 16 people logged into Slido, given the number of participants in Zoom. So we should wait until we have something like maybe 15 or something before moving on.
Yeah. How many people are there in the room right now?
20 right now.
Great. Welcome, everybody. As you are settling in, you can log into Slido and answer the warm-up question. And we will be starting very soon because we have a lot of things to go through, and I think we might otherwise run out of time. So what's now the answer to participant ratio? 10. And so, Nico, if I go back to the original slide, will these results go away?
The results are kept, but of course, no one can vote anymore. Let's say that is currently logging in. So I would suggest let's wait maybe 1 or 2 more minutes, and then you start with the introduction. It's always a part of the Slido experience that you need to have get people on board beforehand, because some people have never used it before.
Yeah. So please, even if you don't want to answer this question, there will be others. So please log into the Slido so you are ready for the other interactive parts of the presentation. But this is hopefully something that you can answer relatively quickly. You don't have to think too much about the mappings at this point. We will get into the details during this session. Okay, but I think we can start slowly. So welcome again, everybody, to the Fair Mappings Working Group session. We are going to be giving you a short status update, and then some preliminary results. I mean, from 3 different themes, and then we try to make sure that there is enough time to at least have this kind of Slido feedback interaction, and preferably if there are things that hopefully we also have time to discuss. So we have places there where we can stop for a while and have a proper discussion, but we will, as I mentioned before, there will be these kind of simple and maybe a bit more complex Slido questions sprinkled here and there throughout the presentation to keep you awake, and also to keep you engaged, hopefully. And so we have 16 answers, and it seems that 17. Thank you. That most of the 3/4 of the people are under the impression that they are using mapping. So let's say more than half. That's great. So let's wait 30 more seconds, because we already have 20 and still counting. And please, if you're just joining the session, also join the Slido, because we will be using it throughout the session. Okay, let's get started. So a little bit more detailed agenda. So first, I will give a small introduction, a short introduction to the working group in general, what we're doing, and then the status, what we have been doing, or what we should do and what we have been doing. Then I will continue with the case study. So this is something that we also had in the previous plenary, but this is now a bit more about the lessons learned, and I will also show the actual case studies that we have collected and created. Then Nico will continue with the initial mapping taxonomy, so the preliminary results related to the other deliverable, and then Jan will do the impossible and present the fair mappings recommendations in 5 minutes. We'll see how that goes. And then, but then we have ample amount of time for discussion of where we can refer back to all of those 3 topics. So the case studies, the taxonomy, and the mapping recommendations. So let's get started. So for those who are maybe not that familiar with the Fair Mappings Working Group, I will now give you very concise overview. So basically the motivation for the working group is, I've tried to summarize it here. So when it comes to mappings, they can be hard to find and evaluate. So even if you find it, they might be in a format that you don't know, or you don't know how to read, or you might not be able to run them or do whatever kind of processing with them that you need in order to evaluate them. And they also, regarding the format, they might be in a state that is not usable for automated processing as is. So it might require substantial work to actually integrate them to some kind of automated systems. And then what we have been experiencing in the working group, and also what I've experienced before, is that there are these maybe unpredictable communication problems when it comes to talking about mapping. And I'm referring to here to the apples and oranges idiom. So you might be talking about a little bit different things, and that might cause confusion. And a couple of the root causes to this are that when it comes to mappings, there might not be any metadata associated with the mappings or individual mapping, or it's somehow insufficient. The representation formats, so how the mappings are shared, are often ad hoc. So they can be code, they can be spreadsheets in different formats and so on, and different structures. And then there is, as I mentioned, the ambiguity to the terminology. So the word mapping can refer to multiple things and different things for different people. So these root causes are the kind of things that the deliverables of the working group aim to provide some assistance to. So first of all, there will be some technical and methodological recommendations as a deliverable. So these are basically outputs of the FAIR impact process, and we will come back to this later in the session. And in the working group, the idea is that we will collect feedback and maybe integrate those and also integrate to provide feedback and help produce maybe updated version of those recommendations, make them better throughout the working group's life cycle. Then we are collecting mapping case studies in a harmonized way. So this would, and I will come back to that in the next slide. And then we will, one of the outputs is this mapping taxonomy, which will help with the communication, at least when you are doing in the context of the working group's idea of mapping. And when it comes to sharing mappings, the idea is to provide an exchange model that supports all the different kinds of mappings that we define in the taxonomy. And finally, what we have been calling fair mappings knowledge base will basically collect all those outputs into one artifact that can be used online available artifact that can be used and curated also, hopefully curated also after the working group has passed. So that's the gist of it. And what we have been doing related to those goals for the past, actually already like a long time, like maybe six months or more. But so the more organized, maybe not, or close to endorsed way of working started late last year. So we had this RDA working group co-chair roundtable with, I don't remember the names of those other working groups there, but the idea was that we would come together and discuss the kind of synergies we could have between the groups, because mappings are something that is involved is related to a lot of activities around the RDA. So we had that in December. We've had regular working group meetings since January, every second week. We finally got the statement of work, or whatever it's called right now, to a place that was endorsed in February. So from the February, the 18-month endorsed period of the working group has actually started. But although, like I said, we've been working on it for a longer time. And then we were lucky enough to get a third co-chair, Toshiyuki Hiraki from Japan, to join us. And so we now have a bit more wider geographical presence also in the co-chairs. We're still hoping to get someone from the Americas. So that is that. I think that hunt is still on. If there are interested candidates, please contact us. And when it comes to the concrete outputs, so we have set up the GitHub pages for the working group and with the case studies. And there is a submission and publishing process that we presented in the previous plenary. It's now up and running, and the curated results are available online. And finally, one of the latest events was that we were, thanks to the funding by the RDA Tiger, we were able to get an external expert. And I think this is public information that it's Nico who will be presenting the taxonomy here. So the idea is that this paid work related to the external expert will help us run basically something that and set up and not work on the actual content of those deliverables. That's something that the working group will do, but organizing it and making sure that it happens, and then communicating with for example the existing the maintainers of the existing specifications related to mappings, and trying to make sure that the good things that comes out of it are integrated into those. And here you have the link to the GitHub repository. So that's the main platform where the work happens. And there's the website that is the generated output of coming from the issues. And then I also linked the working folder where you can see for example, the notes or the minutes of all the group meetings that we've had. Any questions related to the working group? And I encourage you to check out all of those links at some point. And if there are no questions, we can move forward to the case studies. So I'm again going to give a small introduction to what it is and mainly the motivation, and then move on to the things that we've learned, and then throughout the collection process, and then I'm going to show a couple of cases. So first of all, the why we are collecting these cases. The idea is that body of content will form the basis of basically all the other deliverables or outputs of the working group. So the classification ontology will be will be based on the case study or the cases collected. So we will use that as a reference material and see what kind of things are people actually doing related to mappings. And of course, that will also contribute to the exchange model when we get to that part. In the same way, the recommendations, so the fair recommendation, fair mapping recommendations, and the practical framework that has been published by the Fair Impact Projects, those will be evaluated and tested, or can be evaluated and tested in some way or through the cases collected. So I think this is something something that is really important and something that we maybe have to emphasize a little bit more moving forward. So making sure that people who are thinking about, or when we advertise this case study collection process, that we make it crystal clear what is the motivation behind it. And also, one of the details of the use case collection has been that we are looking for implemented cases, or cases that are, or mappings that have already been done. They might not be in production. They don't have to be in production, but the thinking and the implementation is done. So you have something concrete, some concrete mapping at your disposal, and that is something that we are collecting at the moment. I will come back to this in the lessons learned to this problem actually. How it happens in practice is that there is so we also have Google Forms for collecting the issues, but that has not been used once. So I'm pretty confident to say that this GitHub custom issue form will be the main delivery channel for, or main way to contribute those case studies to the collection. But I can also but there is a Google form that replicates the same thing. If you are, for one reason or another, you don't want to use the GitHub issues. From those issues and from that issue form, of course, an issue is created, and there is a possibility to discuss the content and polish the content, and usually, or what has been happening is that there are certain changes that are being made to the data that is coming from the form, and this is maybe something that we could automate a little bit so that there would be less manual work there. I don't know if that's possible technically, but basically this is the pre-check and a little bit of polishing, and then it's published so that it generates the page for the GitHub pages, and then there will be this, for example, this info type of boxes in the beginning, and harmonized format for each of them. And then the idea is that, or it has happened multiple times already, that once the case has been published, and then people are looking at it, and they come up with some ideas for enhancements or something like that, then it can go back to the then it's not actually it's a pull request that you can make, add those changes, and we can also again go through them and come up with or discuss them and then publish them again. So many of the cases you now find in the, or you can now find in the website are maybe second or third version of the original submission. So it's not a static thing, but it's evolving. And talking about the evolvement, so one of the things that we have seen is that the difference in the naming of the case studies. So as a warm-up for the lessons learned, I would like to ask your opinion about the naming convention. So these are examples that could be from the case study. So basically you have one that describes the the mapping in specific organizational context in a bit more, it's a bit more a longer explanation. And then the other one is that you basically just say that it's about specific ontology, specific schema, specific vocabulary, and that's it. What's happening right now is that we have both, I would say, or maybe something, and also something in between. Or you can also say that both of these are less than ideal. So I will give you a couple of minutes to answer then. Thank you. There are already 6 answers and it's unanimous at the moment. Oh, I stand corrected. So if you want, if you think that neither is good, you can maybe use the chat to give a better suggestion for yours. What would be a good naming in this case? So the case is that you have a mapping between ontologies. Nico, how many participants we have? How many people we have in the room? 40. Yes,
40.
Yeah. So I think 20 is already good. Let's wait a couple of more seconds if we can get to 60 or 75 or even 75%. Yes, this is interesting results that the neither is gaining the longer description. So Barbara is commenting on the case studies, differences between case studies and use cases. So this is something that we have discussed within the group, and Barbara even gave a presentation about this. And I'm hoping that once we get to the next slide, Barbara, maybe you could say a couple of words, if that's okay. Okay, so let's move on. So neither neither is good. That's the winning vote at the moment, which is something that we maybe should act upon a little bit. So I'm gonna move on. Thank you everybody for voting. Let's move on. So currently we have around 20, maybe a couple of more submitted and processed cases, and processed meaning that they are part of the GitHub pages. And one of the things that I wanted to discuss was this case studies versus use cases thing. So because some of the submissions read more like the former and some of them read more like the latter. And you can see it from the naming of the case that it reflects the issue. And I think this is the way that we could address this, or what I'm thinking is that could happen through the emphasis on to try to clarify in the form and in the instructions the goal of the case collection. So, but now I would like to invite Barbara to say a couple of words about the distinction between case study and use case, because I don't want to get it wrong.
Okay. I can say something about this. So I'm working on this formalization of these 3 terms. Actually, there are 3. And there's a case study, there's a use case, and a user story. So use case is a very generic problems that need a solution, right? But they are not real world implementations, are generic issues that we want to address. So case studies are real world problems with data in a specific environment, setting. And this is, I think, what you want to see. You want to see real problems that we can help to solve.
Exactly.
And case studies can then be more specifically addressed in user stories, which are requirements of these case studies, but in a very nice way or easy way to describe it. I, as a researcher, want to do alignment between different things to blah, blah, blah. So to integrate data, for example, that's a user story. So user stories can make the case study more specific so that we can really try to help in each of these user stories. The use cases are then abstracted from these case studies. At the end, probably in the guidelines, we will then give indications, so recommendations per use case, and then also link to case studies that are then the real examples. I hope this helps a little bit. And I just wrote in the comment that for me it would be a combination. No, so there was the first title, which was for me more than a use case, and then you could say AgroWalk. No, AgroWalk trying to blah blah blah. So make it a bit more concrete with a specific name, but it can reflect a use case description, but settled in AgroWalk.
Yeah. Great, thanks. This is, I also think that I mean, the case studies are something that we're looking for, and but as you said, maybe the instructions or the naming could be some kind of combination of bit of both type of information. It might be confusing, but this could be the next iteration, because this is related to the second lesson learned. So we have noticed that the current collection form, so the issue form, it doesn't really guide users towards this kind of self-contained case description. First of all, the purpose of the mapping that we first modeled as a drop-down, so basically just is it for semantic interoperability or something like that, is definitely not enough for a purpose of the mapping. Something like that would be maybe more suitable for the type of the mapping, and we need we need more information about the purpose in order to make it more self-contained. And one of the proposals has been to add this user story type of descriptions, and I will show what that could look like in a minute. And also, maybe we should also have this specific description field that comes with the instructions to contextualize the case. And I will show, I think, an example where that happens quite nicely. And finally, we do have a field or a place there for examples, but that could be maybe the instructions, or maybe even the inputs could be, or the collected inputs could be enhanced a little bit, because we've noticed that complete mapping examples are valuable. And I will also show you, I think, a really nice example really soon. So these are the main points that we've come across with this only 20 submitted cases, and this kind of iterative process of making those case descriptions better. Any quick comments or questions, or do you have had similar experiences with collecting this kind of information? You can put them in the rolling notes too. That's maybe time-wise even better. So as an action points for the case study collection, we need to, I think, clarify the type of content being collected. So this is relates to the motivation of the case study collection, and also unify the lingo, the terms being used there. So now there is user or use case study still used, I mean, mixed up in there, and modify the purpose of the mapping section of the form, at least with new instructions, maybe even some new structure, and then add links to representative examples from the collection. And this is a problem that we can now solve because in the beginning, of course, we had no. Looking back, maybe we should have created some good, good and good, nice examples that people could have looked at and take inspiration from, because that would have probably helped in the beginning. But now we have those cases, and I think we should use them to make the new submissions easier to make. So I'm gonna show a couple of cases, and now this is something that probably breaks the sharing. Or does it? Can you still see it?
Yes, all good.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a case study titled Mondo Ontology. And the basic description, or the general description, is mapping disease terminology to harmonize ontology of diseases. But what has been added here under the purpose of the mapping, so it used to be basically just semantic or on ontology alignment. And now there is a quite extensive list of roles and the kind of things that they would like to achieve using the mapping. So there are multiple different roles. There is even a little bit of more explanation of the details of different kinds of mappings in different contexts, how they might be used, or what features of the mapping are needed in different cases, different contexts within the same case. So I think this is a very nice way of describing it. It's a lot, I understand, but this is something that we might want to move towards this direction, and you wouldn't have to write it out in the first submission, but if you have something similar to this, it can be fleshed out in the other or next iterations. Then wait a second. The other one is that I want to show is Lunaris. So this, I think, is a very nicely contextualized case study. And it's nice because it's also a different kind of mapping. So this is schema mapping. And I think it's nicely summarized that this is basically the aggregation type of case where you have specific context. It's Canadian metadata records, and here you can see the original purpose of the mapping. So basically, it was just discovery. So selected from a drop-down list, and the type of mapped resources, and it's very nicely described. And what I especially like is this example, because you have a piece of the sample of the mapping itself. It's a Python code that does the transformation of data, but you also have links to the example, the source record, and the post mapping record. So when you have those three things, you basically have everything you need in order to go through the details of the mapping. So I think this is something that we should strive for. That we have some kind of sample source document, we have some kind of sample mapping, and we have a sample of the post mapping record. I think this is a really nice example of that. And then finally, the iAdopt. So this is a bit, I think, tricky, because it's the iAdopt is a generic model, and I think this like Barbara already kind of like mentioned, it walks the line between this use case and case study. But this is something that has been, the first time that it was submitted, it read more like a use case, and now it has. Sorry.
I agree. Yeah, it was more. Mm-hmm.
And this was due to the fact that there was very little instructions what a case study, what the submission should look like, or what's the angle, what's the motivation, and And now it has been modified, and I think now it's more of a, I mean, this is a good case study, although there is still some old or naming
Yes,
here.
you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. But otherwise, I think now it has specific things that it links together. So you have specific vocabularies in a specific, and the variables being mapped together through these properties of the vocabularies used as the object of those IOTA properties are from a specific case. So something to do with cloud cover. And you have the different ways, very nice visualizations of the different ways that those mappings can happen. So I will not go into the details, so you can check this out yourself. And as you can see through this iteration, it's also possible to add images there.
So actually, what I did here is 3 scenarios, 3 different scenarios, and how to represent this, right, in a formal way.
Yeah.
That is.
And I think visualizations are essential for this kind of or to able to be really easily distinguished between those 3 different scenarios. So I think these images are good, and it would not work as well without the images. So this is also possible. So if you have some existing visualizations or you can create something for the case, that's also possible. But Barbara, was it possible? So it wasn't possible to add these through the forum, but you have to kind of like later add them to another PR, right?
Yes, I will in future.
Yes. Okay. So the final question to wrap up this part is that, have you contributed to the Fair Mappings Working Group case study? Now I've already forgot how many submissions we had to the first question, but if we have it was about 20 something. So we'll see what is the potential potential candidates for the case study out of this audience. So it's a bit of a trick question, but just a little bit. And no obligation, of course. No. And I think we are also on time. So Nico, you can start mentally preparing to start your part in a minute or so. If anyone has any questions they want to, or comments they want to raise, we have a little bit of time here. We will get back to the discussion in the beginning. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe the idea would be to re-emphasize why we're asking so many details in the use case description or case study description. Sorry, Barbara, need to get used to the new terminology. The idea is that all these case studies are going to be part of a knowledge base around mapping, so that it will help communities that are starting their mapping process to actually look and identify case studies that will match their interest, so that they can get some inspiration from these, and they could have a link to classification, so they would understand that it's a data mapping or an entity mapping, and so on and so forth. So we are building slowly a community-driven knowledge base for mappings, which I strongly believe will be invaluable for the community. Also, it's used internally by the working group to actually start doing the classification of mappings based on the descriptions of the types of mapping you're doing. And the case study can be complex, involving many different levels of mappings. That will help us to identify the different types, to propose a model that you could use to exchange these mappings, right, or publish these mappings, and that will be all linked into the knowledge base. So really, we would like to create a community resource to help people doing mappings.
Yeah, that was a really good point. I mean, that I forgot to say that. So why the knowledge base will be there? So that's exactly the reason. So it hopefully something that would make it easier for people starting their mapping things to get started. Yeah. Okay.
Start thinking about the first steps when you started doing, oh, I need to do mappings, and you don't know where to find info.
Yeah.
And imagine the resources that you would have loved to get.
But basically, based on the results here, we have about 15-20% potential case study contributors in the in the people answering the questionnaire. Thank you, everybody. Okay, with this, I will hand the floor to Nico. Go ahead, Suhiro.
Thank you very much. I myself is I'm Yasuhiro Murayama from Japan, Tokyo, and I'm really the outsider of this community, but I'm interested in how the some metadata and the IDs mappings. Those should be very important in a field, and I'm working for the other open science advisor for my Japanese government office. And so my point of view is so bridging the science policy and how the real open science and the metadata handling are going on. And my question is very general. So that many people are discussing the AI technology can do many things, and you have the this kind of the mapping technology, and there are terminology, and there are beautiful graphs. And do you say feel the potential that current artificial intelligence technology will increase the efficiency or effective use or effective influence to your work of this kind of mapping works field? Well, yeah.
That's an excellent question. If you actually go through the case studies, there are already cases cases that use AI technologies to create the mappings. So I think that there's a huge potential there, but I also think that there is still a need for the metadata to understand the metadata and exchange format to make it also not just efficiently create the mappings, but also share them so that they don't need to be recreated all the time, and so that they can be described in a way that that okay, I can repurpose this, reuse this existing mapping in my context. So I think they are very complementary things. Nico, go ahead.
Thank
Just
you very much.
I want to respond to this question as well, but just to get started, can I share my own slides?
Yes, you can.
So I would also like to emphasize here that I think everyone that has tried a little bit the latest generation of AI models for mapping activities, you can see already like a theme where you can basically just throw like an instance, for example, of a data model at a LLM type infrastructure, usually some kind of like agentic framework, and that it will kind of map this by itself magically to some kind of output. And I think as a community that's very much driven by transparency, we always have to balance a bit the potential of those relatively like opaque processes that where you give control essentially to a machine to do the things. You don't even know for sure, did it maybe do a mistake somewhere? Maybe, you could trust it to some degree, but you don't know for sure. And also it's unclear how you will tell it later, can you please not make this mistake in the future? And I think for this purpose, it's very important still that the outputs, the mapping outputs are fair artifacts that humans can review, can comment on, so that it fulfills the purposes of transparent science and engineering practices that we are seeking to establish. So that's kind of like my general take, but I see definitely a very big potential and a very big difficulty coming from that domain as well for the FAIR domain in general.
Yeah, thank you very much. I am very happy to hear that. Yeah, your view that yes, the AI has a very big potential, but yeah, some people have very reluctant to use bring everything to the AI. So we need to have the kind of the balance. So yeah, that's yeah, I'm very glad to hear to be here. Yeah, to
Nice.
have your views. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Barbara, did you have a question or comment?
Well, I just wanted to say that if I adopt, we go one step further because it's so complex. It's not easy. So we need help by LLMs. But that will be with a benchmark. Yeah, we are creating shackle rules, and then we also have ideal situations and less ideal, and we will then test it again. So it will be a complete, also transparent way, because I think if you use LLM, you have also to annotate it this way, so transparently how it has been created, what you did, in which process, which step. So, well, we are still working this, but by the end of the year is something that we can share.
Thanks. Jan, something short, hopefully, so we can...
Yes, just to say that this activity indeed does not preclude the use of AI. On the contrary, we still have to keep in mind that current LLMs do not understand the semantics, they just understand the statistics. So mappings that can be generated will need to be reviewed and shared. So what we're doing here is to try to build this knowledge base, but also the exchange model, so that you can work, once the AI has delivered the mappings, you have them in a structured format so that you can actually use it with other tools, like for review and this kind of things. So it is complementary. Of course, AI is going, well, it's the elephant in the room, basically. So we don't want to preclude that, but there's still some caution on the outputs of the alignments.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you for all the comments. I'm going to start with, one small elephant probably from earlier in the conversation. So what actually is this like mapping that we're talking about all the time? It was very good to see in the beginning when the working group formed that we had, let's say,
the poll.
Oh, did it not? Maybe because you have it still active, I can't activate it. I don't know. Maybe this is, let me see. Maybe you have to share then in this case. So let me try one more time. No, it works. So yeah, while I'm talking, you can already log in and give your answer to this very open-ended question. But we were 10 people, kind of around 10, 12 people in the forming days of the working group, with about 60 different opinions about what exactly a mapping is. And it is true that it is a very convoluted terminological place, and whatever we say a mapping is, in the end, people will have very kind of, there will be always at least 70% of the people that will disagree with that specific thing, and you have to contextualize it. So I just wanted to kind of give you a flavor of like how complex just how complex it is to put a kind of like scope circle around what we are trying to do in this working group here. And hopefully, just we have 8 people adding already like 8, 9, 10, 15 different things. And probably if everyone here will have like 6 different things that they would add here to this what they are thinking about when they are thinking about mapping. So it's a very important thing to remember, that when we are coming in and telling you now about mappings, that we are not trying to establish like a general terminology that applies to everyone's mind in all of the world, but to scope what we are doing here in this working group towards defining fair mapping standard. All right, I love this one here. So foobar, okay. People get, people's mind explode when they think about it. Linking, like connecting two things together. I think that this is a pervasive theme in all of the sort of notions of mapping somewhere. Correspondence is another word you hear a lot, and we will refer to it as well. Corresponding entities, corresponding classes play a role in mapping. Connection, linking, okay, they are the same sort of thing. Equivalence, strange territory, that's definitely true. I'll wait for at least 20 people to log in here, so to give their opinions. So at least one more has to sacrifice themselves to come in, because we will have quite a few questions coming up. Data integration, these are all pertaining to function. All right, we have the 20th person, and you can see it's a mess. It's a huge, like what comes to your mind? There are a lot of different things. I will ask now a slightly more controlled question. So which of the following come to your mind first when you hear the term mapping out of context? The process of creating a set of mappings, the process of transforming some input into some output, a digital artifact, like for example, that describes, for example, mappings, correspondences, and so on, or a specific individual correspondence, like one ontology term mapped to another ontology term. You can see a wide range of answers. It's interesting that the process of creating is almost as widely understood to be mapping as the digital artifact. I would have thought that this last one, like transformation, would be much higher in this particular crowd here in the list. It's really, really interesting. Let's say that even our expectations aren't met entirely here, but you can see this here is sort of, this is when people are talking about, for example, ontology matching is probably sort of one of the most known processes for creating a set of correspondences, like lexical matching, semantic matching, and so on. Interesting. Yeah. So we have 26 answers. I'm going to move on. You can see a lot of different kind of like what first comes to mind. So we are not going to define, as I said, what is a mapping. In the context of our working group, our starting model, let's say, to think about what is a mapping is quite simple. We have some kind of a source. We have some kind of a target, some process that does something from the source to the target, a transformation, for example, or an association. And we have something we refer to currently as a mapping specification, which could be anything from like a Python script, like in an ETL kind of setting, to an XSLT script, to a SESM TSV file, to any number of like, artifacts that encode the things that are being encode the things that are being mapped together. In the sense of what we are talking about here, just to scope it a little bit, a mapping could be anything. It could be a function in a computer program. But for this working group, we are specifically looking at roughly mappings that correspond to a correspondence relation. So anything that describes how two corresponding elements are related to each other, not like a name, not like a birth date to a person. It's also a mapping in some sense, but we are talking about roughly corresponding things, like a person and its representation, the description of a person and its representation in a different metadata format, for example. So the source and the target could correspond to things like the same instance in a database, or the same or similar concept in an ontology or taxonomy, same or similar value in a data model like an enum, and so on. So from a high level perspective, this is what we are working off. As Jonas and Jan have already pointed out, this is all a work in progress. All of this, you could basically burn all of this down. If you are commenting on this and say this is wrong, no problem. This is our working model at the moment. So we have basically a concept of mapping activity, which is roughly like a prof activity, which we have two important ones. One is the mapping application process that takes as an input something and generates something as an output. And then we have another kind of process, which is a generation process, which is things like lexical matching, manual mapping curation, even like writing a Python script would fall under this here, with the purpose of generating a mapping specification, which itself is conceptualized as something like, I'm not saying it ends up to be a DCAT dataset, but something like a DCAT dataset. And this specification has a bunch of components. So these are individual mappings, things like named entity mappings, which are defined a little bit in the next slides, or an ontology axiom, or a transformation rule in a data transformation pipeline, and so on. And then we have the associated mapping categories. For example, these are the big sort of groups that we are also using to classify our use cases. So we have schema mapping, named entity mapping, for example, and at the moment ontology alignment, which is a bit of a weird one because it could kind of fit under both a little bit. So what I will describe to you now is a bit more detail, these three. All right, before we get into this, one question that came up during our sessions and we didn't have a good answer for. I recognize that there will be not many people that have an opinion here. So if there are 10 answers, I will be happy, but we have no answer. So what do you think, given this, sorry, I move back, given this picture here, this relationship, what would be a good relationship between mapping specification and mapping category? So and here we have a bunch of suggestions like has category. So you will end up with something like data map JSON has category some schema mapping, or using a relationship like RDF type, data map JSON RDF type, some schema mapping, or some relationship like has mapping type. So maybe you disagree with all of these. I just want to get a sense of whether someone has an opinion here, and I won't wait very long. If there are 10 answers, I will move to the next question. Sorry if I can't go back to the picture because the Slido questions will disappear when I do. But we've shared the slides before, and you can look at the slides if you want to see the picture again in your browser, better if you need to see it. All right, yeah, so I don't know, like this is a hard question. Maybe I can see that not many people have an opinion about this. But I will take it into advisement that many people don't know, and a few people suggest has category as a possible option, but there's also a wide range of answers here. So I'm going to move forward. All right, so let's go into these three mapping categories, let's call them. The first one is entity mapping. So first of all, an entity is some symbol, such as a code in a terminology, or a class in an ontology, or a permissible value in a data model, or generally an identifier in a database, or simply a controlled string in some text field that is intended to refer to some real world thing, a person, a concept, a disease, a gene, an organization, and so on. And when we talk about entity mappings, we essentially talk about correspondences between such symbols. So in this case, this would be an example that this lexical string here, Friedrichs _ ataxia, and the OMOP 441554 represent both correspond, let's say, or link to the real world concept of Friedrichs ataxia. And so they're both symbols for it. And mapping would be a link between those two identifiers. In terms of like examples, as Jonas has described, what we are doing is we are collecting all of these use cases in order to get to get many of these kinds of examples from the community. So this one is from the Mondo use case that Jonas has presented before. So this you can see, for example, here, like some ontology concept is described as an exact match to another ontology concept. And there are some other pieces of metadata associated with it, like what kind of a matching process led to this mapping. In this case, it was lexical matching, what kind of confidence was there, what tool was used, and so on and so on. And then we have other kinds of scenarios like the in-ray scenario, where you describe mappings using simple SCOS exact match. So you can see here, for example, a mapping in RDF from an in-ray thesaurus ID to a agrovoc identifier. And another example was, for example, the circular economy example in our case studies, which is using the alignment format for describing alignments between various different ontologies, so between entities in different ontologies. So given what we've seen so far, we have 3 different kinds of entity mappings within our case studies. We have type 1 would be something like a lexical token linking to an identifier. So here, for example, we have the information extraction case study. So you have like a word and a piece of text, and you want to kind of associate that word to an identifier, like an ontology identifier, for example. And this was always a very controversial category for entity mappings, but has been established now as being an important use case. So we list it here. The more classical one, which is you link from one identifier to another identifier, for example, to ontology terms, to database identifiers, and so on. And the third one, like for example, the iAdopt case study that Barbara presented before. This is not from the iAdopt, by the way. This is a different example, but iAdopt is an example of a complex mapping or mapping of concept expression. So you can see something like hypertensive heart disease without congestive heart failure in one terminology is mapped to an expression like hypertensive heart disease and congestive heart failure that is modified by a not modifier. But note, this only fits under, like, strictly speaking, entity mappings if you're able to express these expressions as a specific entity reference, and this is something that's a bit controversial. All right, next question. What name do you think would be best for mappings in this category of entity mappings? So we have entity mapping as an option, named entity mapping, which is a bit less ambiguous than entity mapping, but more wordy, correspondence, which is often used to describe semantic relationships in ontology matching, or other, in case you don't like any of these, any of the above. As always, I'll take a look at, we are 39, so I'll wait for 25 maybe. Before we had 26, so wait a little bit more. Yeah, very interesting. So while named entity mapping is a more precise way to put it, because that is really what this is. We are talking about named entity rather than, for example, a complete data structure that describes a person in this category. People seem to prefer a simple way to refer to these type of mappings. Just going to capture this here as a kind of like, an interesting thought for the working group maybe to take on board. Okay, I'm moving forward. So the next big category is schema mapping. I need to, I will not go into super much detail because we're already a bit over time, but here we have the problem of how do we go from, let's say, a description of a person in one semantic space, like one data model, for example, to descriptive of a person in another one. This is basically the category that specifies how individual data elements or values in a source correspond to elements in a target data set. And here we have, so for this example, you see here we have a person that has a name and a person that has a given name and a family name in a different data model. So how do you go from the one to the other? You can imagine something like an ad hoc JSON mapping where you define, for example, the source class and the target class, the source property and the target properties, and then some sort of transformation rule that is applied to get from the one to the other. You could have, imagine like a sort of Python mapping thing where you have like a mapping function that takes in a record of an instance of one of these and translates it to an instance of the other. Or you can use something like this LinkML map framework, which is a new framework out there that allows you to describe such mapping derivations in a formal manner where you can see, okay, there's a person that has a slot called name, and that name is populated by concatenating given name and family name from the source, from a source class, which is schema person. Note what is interesting is that every schema mapping also has implicitly or explicitly entity mappings as its component, association between my person and schema person, and association between the different slots, or even associations between values of the slots as well. So what kind of types of schema mappings do we have? So we have two rough big use cases. The one use case is schema or data conversion transformation. These are separated into two big groups. The first one is between two different schemas. So here we have the DLite, the NII data governance, and the Lunaris use case, where you translate information from one use case to another use case. Data model, and then you have mappings between two versions or variants of the same schema. And this is a good example of why case studies are so important, because before we had a kind of, we're all like thinking, oh, we know exactly what kind of use cases we're targeting, and but these are all things that the community submitted, which I personally, at least, have never even thought about before starting with this working group. And that's why it is so important to kind of do this wide collection of case studies. But you can see things like schema subsetting, so linking, let's say, a small mapping of a small subset of a bigger monolithic schema, or schema normalization, where you take, for example, a deeply nested schema and map it to something more flat for various reasons, maybe efficiency in search indexing and similar other reasons. Schema versioning, where you want to describe, for example, how to migrate data from version 0.9 to version 1.0. And of course, schema meta modeling, where you want to define how to go from both from an instance of a schema in one format to an instance of a schema in another format, like from TSV to RDF, or translate a schema from one format like JSON schema to another format called, like, for example, XML schema, in order to use, for example, tools that are already been developed in that domain. The second use case is documentation, which we wanted to separate a little bit, like where people create simple tables that they put on a website for reference. They say this element in that schema maps to that element in that schema, for example, for documentation purposes, to communicate, for example, to their stakeholders that, yes, we have captured all of the elements in a that is described in the schema, or in the other schema, in our schema as well. This is very different, and we are not much concerned with this specific use case in our work here. All right, next question. Is schema mapping a good term to group this huge variety of very specific subcategories like transformation, subsetting, normalization, and so on?
Nico, I think we need to move forward
I
quite
will
quickly.
jump over the ontology alignment part. I will just not do it. All right, it's a very clear tendency, let's say. Thank you for your answers, and I'm going to move forward now. I'm not going to discuss ontology alignment. It's basically a kind of special case of both of these that we've talked about, and you can look at the slides if you're interested in this particular category. All right. If you like to join the discussion on the mapping taxonomy, then we have only just begun to define a solid core terminology around mapping. Please, everyone here that is interested, join the effort. We've all our previous discussions happened within the group, the meeting so far. I've created some discussions on GitHub, so you can contribute to those definitions in the GitHub discussions as well, if you're interested. And generally, if you have seen things here during the presentations that you find very wrong or even very good, please feel free to reach out on the issue tracker and let us know. The end goal of all of this will be to incorporate all of this taxonomy and terminology in the semantic mapping vocabulary, and it will look like something like a regular sort of ontology that you can use and reuse for your metadata needs in your project. I'm going to unshare now, and I don't know who wants to take over.
Do you want me to, Jan, to do the sharing?
Yes, because I didn't activate Slido, so it will be faster. Sorry.
No worries.
Thanks, Nico, for the presentation. And the terminology is going to be used also to annotate the different use cases, right? So the idea is that we clarify also the classification of the use cases. So this is a piece of work that we started uncovering when we started discussing about the fair mapping recommendations, because we ended up discussing with different people from different communities with different perspectives. And at some point, there were some disagreements, and that helped us realize that mapping is a very loaded term, and it covers so many things that all the things that Nico was showing. That's also why the use case collection is definitively important. Now, I would like to talk about the fair mapping recommendations. Can you go to the next slide, please, Eunice? So the question that has been driving the work in Fair Impact is these mappings, they are hardly findable. They are not necessarily easily reusable. So we need to make them fair because they are a huge piece in information systems because they interlink and they interconnect different information systems. And if we want to work in the realm of open science and cross-disciplinarity, we need to actually get this mapping fair. So we started organizing several workshops, and we have been working around establishing some recommendations to tell people doing mappings how they can make them fair. And in order to do that, we grouped the individual FAIR principles. So we went through all the 15 FAIR principles, and we grouped them into 4 categories: model and format, that covers interoperability and reusability; metadata for findability and reusability; PID for findability; and service and API for accessibility and findability. We have come up with 18 recommendations so far, established on the community's contribution, the many different discussions we had in the many different workshops, including the Bird of a Feather we organized in RDA. And these 18 recommendations are grouped with 4 generic recommendations for each of the categories, 1 for each of the categories, and associated technical recommendations. Can you go to the next one, please? So I'm going to go very fast. We're going to publish the document as soon as possible. You can already find them in the deliverable of the Fair Impact task on fair mappings. For model and format, the generic recommendation is that you should use a model to represent mappings with explicit links between the mapped entity and metadata for the crosswalk that we consider being the mapping set or the collection of mappings, and the individual mappings themselves that can be serialized in various formats, right? So that's the generic recommendation. Our first technical recommendation is use SESA model to structure and share your mapping. This is the best one currently available, so use it as much as possible. Provide the mappings in different serialization formats, including linked data standard. The reason is mappings are interconnecting things. The best way to interconnect in the current technological landscape is RDF and linked data. So basically try to provide them as linked data. And make sure the metadata describing the crosswalk and the individual mappings are aligned with standards and fair vocabulary to structure the metadata, such as Dublin Core, DCAT, and this kind of thing. Next, please. For metadata, you need to provide as much metadata as possible to describe the crosswalk and individual mappings. And the reason why is you get an idea in mind when you do the mapping, the other do not have the same idea. So if they want to reuse your mapping, they need to have as much information about the process you've used and why you actually selected that link between the terms or the metadata fields and so on and so forth. So basically, the technical recommendation that goes along with that is use the minimum SESAM metadata we have defined in Fair Impact. Actually, you can use the SESAM metadata schema. It's very extensive. Basically, we haven't reinvented the wheel. We just looked at things that should be mandatory in the SESAM metadata schema. So, of course, as in the FAIR principles, it says rich metadata needs to be provided, rich being not necessarily defined. You can provide as much as you can, as you want, basically, and the metadata schema from SESAM is very, very extensive. If the mapping are separated from the associated metadata, make sure you include an additional metadata fields containing the PID pointing to the mapping or the crosswalk. And this is one of recommendations based on the FAIR principles themselves. Next one. Service and API, basically, the generic recommendation is publish your collection of mapping or crosswalk and the associated metadata into a specialized repository, such as the metadata schema and crosswalk registry to provide access for humans, right? But also for machines, right? So they need to be retrievable by machines, reusable by machines. So publishing them on GitHub is great, but finding them on GitHub is a pain. So try to publish them into a dedicated repository so they are made more easily findable. And then we come up with a long list of technical recommendations. I don't want to go there, otherwise we'll spend 10 minutes and I only have 5 minutes. But things like mapping repositories should support the attribution of globally unique, persistent, resolvable identifiers. They must extract and publish the metadata records from the crosswalk and each of the individual mappings. And I will stop there. You also need to have procedures for authentication and authorization. Can you go to next, so I can just skip to the 5 minutes. So the recommendations are available on the slides. They are open for discussions. This is the first draft. The idea is that we should discuss that in the context of the FAIR mapping working group. But also we are, and I will talk about it later, and we are organizing a final workshop for this task. Now, the fourth generic recommendation is that crosswalk. Here, again, this definition that we are using is that it's a collection of mappings. The individual mappings in that collection and their version must be identified with a globally unique, persistent, and resolvable identifier. And the technical recommendation is simple. Use web-based identifiers to enable the access to the SESAM mapping metadata schema and the data. Establish and publish a PID policy or GUPRI policy describing the approach for versioning and explicitly describing the preservation policies. Next slide, please. Now, we started investigating the PID. That's why I finished my short list with the PID, because basically a mapping is already 3 different PIDs or GUPRIs, right? The one that describes the source, the one that describes the target, and the one that describes the relation. And then you need to add up on top of that, one for the mapping collection, one for the metadata of the mapping collection, one for each individual mappings, and one for each metadata record of the individual mapping. So you start having a huge amount of PIDs that are necessary for each of the mappings. And then we did a small exercise taking the code meta mapping base, and we counted that, for instance, just for that simple sets of mappings, we would need something that 2,200 PIDs, individual PIDs, just for that collection. So basically, we're facing a combinatorial explosion of PIDs that needs to be resolved when we use the mappings at runtime. So basically, that's start raising the question, how do we scale? Because if we start having millions of mappings and we want to use them for search, for instance, and you need to use them and resolve them while doing the query, it's going to take a huge amount of time. Can you go to the next, please? And so there will be some questions in the discussion part related to that, because we need to think about how we manage these mappings, PIDs. There might be some shortcuts we might take, but we are also constrained with the recommendations made by the FAIR principles. So, and it seems that that's something that was not necessarily anticipated when the FAIR principles were written down, because maybe no one actually understood the need for high granularity PIDs. And that raised the question of how we handle that while still trying to be in line with the FAIR principles. So to discuss these things, to actually gather feedback on the recommendations, also we have another output of the FAIR mapping, the FAIR Impact project, which is called the Practical Mapping Framework, which provides a process with questions to help you structure your process of mapping internally. The idea is that we organize a workshop on May 7th, where you can register. It's on the website of FAIR Impact. And the idea is that we'll talk about the recommendations, the practical mapping framework, but also things that we haven't yet fully discussed, which is the governance of mappings. These mappings are living artifacts. They change over time. They might be deprecated. So we need to start thinking about what should be the process. So I welcome you, or I invite you to join us for this workshop that will be early May. And I will stop here. I think that's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. You did the impossible. Thanks. Almost. You made it. So we have a couple of minutes left. There are some general discussion pointers here, and I would especially like to go through the first one, because this deals with the thing that Jan mentioned. So we have been talking about what a mapping is a little bit. I mean, the type of mappings, but now this refers to the individual mapping. So something that Jan described as basically being a set of 3 IDs, PIDs, for the source, the predicate, and the target. So do that combination need to have an identifier?
I think that's a key question, but then that's related to the usage, right? So once the mapping or the crosswalks, the mapping collections will be published, it is possible that you may want to create your own collection based on several existing collections, and not necessarily use the full collection, but just some individual mappings. So without having them identified within the collection with a unique identifier, there's no way for you, easy way for you to actually provide a pointer to recreate a new collection. So that was the initial idea of our recommendation.
If you want, you can also comment on this. I think this is the only question that we might have time to go through, or Jan does some of the backup questions we have there. Is there something that you would like to, or
maybe we can wait for, well, we do have some related questions.
Still time. Barbara, go ahead.
No, I don't understand completely the problem of identifiers. I know there are additional artifacts identifiers, but if they are free, I think they are useful, because then we can really point to exact elements within all these mappings. So depends a little bit what sort of identifiers you are talking about. They should be persistent, but we don't need DOIs.
No, so I mean, that's something we would like to analyze. So DOIs are some issues. Now, the main issue that the the point of the question is, let's follow the FAIR principles, and everything needs to be uniquely identified so that we can actually point to it. The main issue is when you start implementing this, you end up to have to resolve a lot of these PIDs. And even if you use web-based, so the reason why we propose web-based is the best way to do that is to use something that has been demonstrated as capable of resolving so many PIDs or URLs. That's the web, basically. The World Web is a scalable way of doing this. However, if you think about the usage, for instance, mappings being used for searching throughout different databases through the mappings, when you do the query, then you end up having to resolve so many PIDs that you might degrade the speed of the query. But I agree that we need PIDs. So even if it's Perl or W3AD, web-based PIDs, that's going to be a challenge. Nico.
They want to add also that it's not for the reason why, for example, SESAM doesn't have yet a way to identify individual mappings, and this is discussed on multiple issues there, is that it isn't only a problem for, like, you know, retrieval and building systems, but also for curation. So imagine you have like groups out there that are what they are doing is they're like domain experts that are kind of linking two things together, for example, two ontologies, two taxonomies, and so on. They don't know anything very much about like the technical details of mappings. And then you ask them basically to maintain an identifier scheme. And everyone who has ever done that knows how hard this is to make sure that the identifiers don't clash, that if you remove a mapping, you don't accidentally create a new mapping in the future with the same identifier. So it's all of these things are solvable, but they cause a massive burden on groups that need to curate mappings in the first place. So that's another reason why it's, you know, hard to mandate them on the mapping level.
Which is why we delegate the responsibility for managing this kind of PID schemes to the tools.
Perfect.
And to the service provider, because that should be supported by the tools when you work with mappings. Sorry, Barbara, you wanted to react as well.
I just second what you said. So it's the service should do it for you, not the mappers, not the people that do the work. And
there is go ahead.
So hashes are also used as identifiers.
There is some nice discussion in the chat that you should also check out. Yes, I think this is a good question to end. I mean, this is, and there is actually, yeah, well, the majority of the people say that we need identifiers for individual mappings, but also the no has 30%.
Sorry, can I add? So I have done lots of mappings without identifiers in semantic artifacts, you know, the single mappings, entity mappings. This will be still a question mark how to treat them, because these are legacies. We did it before without identifiers for each of the mappings. I understand the value, but what should I do with all the stuff that was created before? That's still open in my head. No clue.
Well, I think that's the problem now that we are facing with the FAIR mapping recommendations, that the main case is that the mappings are in the correspondence table in many cases, no metadata and not even link between the concepts that is made explicit. So at some point you have a huge legacy of mappings, and if you want to move to FAIR mappings recommendations to make them fair, we understand that's going to be a huge amount of work. In the meantime, the gain outweighs the pain.
Yeah, sorry, it's not only this, the correspondence table is also within the semantic artifact, saying this concept is Broders cost match or whatever, exact match, is within the concept description, which is not just a correspondence table. So that's very
Yeah,
often.
so yeah.
Yeah,
But then they're within the artifact. Sorry, Jonas, go ahead.
I was just wanted to paraphrase comment from the chat that this kind of added value can be so added value of being able to mix and match those mappings to lower the redundant work. So it might be, even though it might be costly to have those mappings, it might be still something that should be done. Okay, so we need to finish. I'm gonna skip this and I'm gonna go to the next steps slide. So this is the last one. So as Nico mentioned, there is this comment round related to the first version of the mapping. So some of the concepts there available. So please, it's waiting for your input. So if you have, so that's the place where you can put it. We're preparing for the P25 session submission. It will be spectacular. We need more cases, big and small. So I've had some people coming to me asking, my case is so small or so, I'm not going to say insignificant, but something that it's small, seems small, and they asking, should they put it there? And my answer has been that yes. If you think you have a mapping there and it's available, and then please, you can add it. It can be simple, it can be complex from the academic and from the industry. All is good. And actually this moving towards the fair mappings implementation examples is a teaser for the P25 session submission. So that's something that we're discussing, to have concrete examples of how those fair mappings would look like. That could be one goal. And of course, feedback solicitation for these recommendations that Jan presented. That's it. Thank you everybody for participating and interacting. I think these Slidos worked pretty well.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Have a nice day and a nice hardy plenary.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Romain.
Lise,
Hey,
are you still there? Yes.
yeah, I'm still.
The chat, will that be stored somewhere?
I think it's actually all in the rolling notes.
Excellent.
Yeah, and if not, then when you record, it will generate the video recording, the audio recording, and the chat.
Great.
So you'll have everything
Recording's still
accessible.
on, by the way. We can stop that maybe. How does that happen? Can I stop the recording?
Jonas, you're the host, so you should be able to do that.
Yes, I